أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is ASIF Ali PARVEZ from London, UK, and this is my presentation number 11. And as you already know, the theme of my presentation is Holy Quran. And today in this presentation, I will talk about weak nuclear force. As the name suggests, it's a weak force and it is inside the nucleus. Now, you know, as I mentioned many times, in any atom, there is a nucleus, which is in the center, and electron goes round and out. But this force is only inside the nucleus. And you know, a nucleus is extremely small, so the range of this force is also extremely small. Just to give an idea how small it is, just take a human hair. Just take a human hair and think of its thickness, which is 1/1,000,000th time less than that. Very difficult even to imagine that. But that is the range. Extremely, extremely small. We call it infinitesimally small range. Having said that, it is very important. And I want to mention here a name of a lady. Her name is Madame Marie Curie. This is the picture of her and her husband. And she was the one who discovered radioactivity. And she won the Nobel Prize in 1903. And then she discovered two elements, which I will mention a little bit later in the next slide. And she was awarded again Nobel Prize in 1911. She is the only person, a lady, who has won Nobel Prize twice. No scientist ever have won Nobel Prize twice. Once she won, as I said, in physics, and second time in chemistry. Now, she was experimenting with some material which had radium in it. And now we know it's extremely dangerous. And I will explain in the next slide why it is. But at that time, she didn't know that it's a very dangerous stuff she is dealing with. And she didn't take any precaution. Unfortunately, she died because of these deadly rays. She got some kind of cancer because of that. So as I said, Madame Marie Curie, she discovered radioactive rays. So what are those rays? Now, scientists have just given them like ABC. So one they call alpha rays, second is beta rays, and third is gamma rays. And I will be, as I said, will be making program and demonstrating what's the importance of these rays. And she discovered new elements. One is called radium. Radium is a natural element and it emits these radiations. And second one, she gave it the name polonium because she was a Polish lady and she had a great love for her country. So rather than giving her own name, she gave it the name polonium based around Poland. And at that time, she didn't know because this weak nuclear force was understood many, many years after her death. But today we know that this radioactivity takes place because of weak nuclear force. The second name which I want to mention is, and many of you must have heard his name, is of Professor Abdus Salam Sahib. He was born in 1926 and died in 1996. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1979. He is the first Pakistani Ahmadi Muslim who have won the Nobel Prize. Although Malala Yousafzai has also won Nobel Prize, but that is Prize for Peace. In physics or in science, Professor Abdus Salam is the only Pakistani so far who has won Nobel Prize. And he was a very, very devoted Pakistani. So much so, just to give you an example, He lived in London, UK most of his life. He never took British nationality. He always kept Pakistani nationality. And as you can see in this picture, when he was receiving the Nobel Prize, he was wearing a typical Pakistani dress with a turban. Somebody asked him, Dr. Salam Sahab, why don't you take British nationality? People are dying to get British nationality. And he said, look, one day I am hoping and I'm praying that I will get Nobel Prize. And when I get the Nobel Prize, the media shouldn't say a British or a British person who was born in Pakistan won the Nobel Prize. So they will use the British Pakistani. So he said, I don't want to give media or people to say it's a British Pakistan. I want to say it's a Pakistani who won Nobel. And I want to tell the world that we Pakistanis and people living in the third world can also reach to those heights. And Nobel Prize is probably the biggest reward in science. Now, when he won the Nobel Prize, he was also head of Department of Physics at Imperial College London, UK. And he was also the director of International Center for Theoretical Physics. This is the only one organization in the world which is sponsored by United Nations and International Atomic Energy Agency and by the Italian government. And when he died next year, they changed the name to Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics. And at a program, I will probably go through a little bit more detail on that. So what was his discovery? He and other two scientists discovered independently that two forces could be combined together. And I will explain that a little bit later. I want to tell you a little bit about Professor Abdus Salam Sahab, because he is my hero, he is my mentor. I can say he was a born genius. He was a brilliant student. And he got his first position in matriculation in the bigger Punjab, which at that time was part of what today is India and Pakistan. And people were surprised that a Muslim have won and took the first position. And he studied in Jung. And I have visited Jung many times because I spent most of my life as a student and as a lecturer in Trapua, and Jung was at that time our district. And this photograph which I'm showing you here is his picture when he was first position took in matriculation. But he took first position in FA, first position in BA, first position in MA. And he did MA in mathematics. And as far as I know, so far, nobody has broken his record. So he was such a genius, such a hardworking, but God-given intelligence. He got this scholarship, and at that time, India and Pakistan was one country. So he decided to go to Cambridge in the St. John's College. And normally, when people have done like MSc or MA, they go straight for a PhD degree. But if some graduates are watching my program or postgraduates, from my personal experience as a student and as a lecturer, I can tell you the foundation which is made in graduation and post-graduation is very, very important. When you do PhD, you just take one topic and you research it. So you become very, very specialized on a very teeny tiny field of science. Obviously, PhD is the highest degree. I'm not denying that. But the foundation is built while you're doing degree or post-graduation. He did his degree in 2 years, and he did it in mathematics. And again in Cambridge, he was a shining student that he was given the title of Wrangler. Now, Wrangler seems a very funny title, but it is a title given to somebody who is the best amongst the best. So he was given this title here. And he had one more year scholarship. So he took the advice of second caliph of Jamaat Ahmadiyya, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani, Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, and his parents and his professors. And they said, why don't you study physics? And Salam Sahib said, oh, I haven't studied physics in the last 6 years. How do you expect me to pass, physics in 1 year? And I have got MSc in physics, and I know it's not, what he was saying was true. Physics is a very hard subject, and you have to work very hard. And one of his professors, who was a Nobel laureate, he said, look, I set you a challenge. And if you are successful, then you will be the cleverer than 2 of my students who later won Nobel Prize. And I set them a challenge that they could do degree in physics 1 year, and they didn't. So Professor Salam took the challenge, and I must say this, he got first-class degree. So in 3 years, he got degree in mathematics and degree in physics. And then he loved physics so much that he dedicated his life to physics. As I said, I am a student of physics. And even though when I come to England, I have spent most of my working life in learning and teaching and developing computers, because I changed my field. But having said that, my love for physics have never diminished. In 1949, he was again given a scholarship. Now Pakistan has established. And he came back to his college and wanted to do a Ph.D. And he met a professor whose picture I'm showing you is Professor Nicholas Kemmer. He was a Russian professor, and he was reluctant to take Salam Sahib, because he said, he said to his superiors, look, I have already got 7 students and I am looking after them to do a PhD. And I know from experience how difficult it is to supervise people at that level. And I don't want to get another person. I've got time, But the other professor said, look, we're not giving you an ordinary student. He is the brilliant. He is the most intelligent student we have come across. So very reluctantly, he took him as a student and became a supervisor. But he said, oh, go and see one of his students. His name was Paul Mathews. And he has nearly completed his PhD. And he has written the thesis, and see if there is any problem solved. And if there's a problem, take that problem. So basically, I'm saying it never took a serious interest in Salam Sahib. So Dr. Salam Sahib, obviously he was not doctor at that time, he went to see Paul Mathews. And this is Salam Sahib's sentence. He said to him in a joking manner, are there any crumbs left? The crumbs are when you take a bread, there are pieces which drop out. So he said, you have probably solved all the problem, but is there any problem, small problem left? So I can do research on it, and perhaps I can get a PhD on that. And Paul Mathews laughed. He said, I have just solved one problem. And the biggest problem is still outstanding. And nobody, as far as he said, I know, who knows the answer to this problem. And what's that problem? Now I'm just going to use the words. If I started explaining this, most of you will be lost. So the field was called quantum electrodynamics. And in a nutshell, it deals with the nucleus and atom. That's the only thing I can say. And the issue outstanding was overlapping infinities. It's extremely complex subject, so no way I can explain this so that an ordinary, layman, because my programs are aimed at laymen. But I say if a graduate or postgraduate or a scientist is watching this program, please go to internet or whatever libraries and try to study what is overlapping infinities. Now, one thing Paul Mathews said to Abdus Salam Sahib, that there is one gentleman, his name is Professor Freeman Dyson, and I'm showing you the picture here. In his opinion, he has written 2 articles, 2 papers. Study them, and you may get some clue. And this gentleman was an English gentleman, but he was based in Princeton in America. And he used to come to Birmingham for 1 month to teach to students in UK. And luckily, he was in Birmingham UK at that time. So Abdul Salam Saab contacted him and said, would you mind giving me an hour? I want to get some guidance from you. And the Professor Dyson said, okay, you come to Birmingham, please come, I will have a chat with you. But I am going back to America, so I won't have much time. So anyway, Abdul Salam Saab took a train and went to Birmingham and met him and talked about the subject of overlapping infinities and his two papers. And Salam Saab realized that what a difficult problem it was. And he asked him, please give me some clue, where should I start the research? And Professor Dyson, I have no clue. You know, if I knew, I would have done it myself. You know, I have spent all my life doing research, but this is one problem which I can't solve. And luckily, he was traveling back to London, and Salam Saab said, if you mind, can I sit on the same train with you? So I have another couple of hours to have a chat with you. And Dyson was very impressed. He said, oh, this young man is very interested. He said, oh, please do come in, join me, and we will have further chat. So Abdul Salam Saab had a long chat with him. But when he departed, he wasn't quite sure where to start. Anyway, with prayers, he started thinking, and God guided him. That's the word I'm deliberately using, because nobody scientific community was able to guide him. Supervisor said, go away and solve this problem yourself. And the man, the authority on this subject said, I don't know how to solve it. So anyway, Salam Saab took this challenge. And can you believe? He came up with a mathematical model of this problem. And he did it in 5 months. 5 months! And he prepared the thesis and went to see his professor, Kemmer. He said, look, I've solved the problem. Here is the answer. And Professor Kemmer was very surprised. He looked at the thesis and realized it was beyond him. So he said, there's only one person. If he says yes, you will get a Ph.D. If he says no, you will go back to square one and start thinking again. So Salam Saab's thesis was sent to Professor Dyson. And when he looked at that thesis and he remembered that this young man had come to see me in Birmingham and traveled with me on the train, and he has solved this problem in 5 months, which we, the scientists who are top of our careers, all over the world, could not even dream to solve it. He took his thesis to a gentleman whose name is Robert Oppenheimer. He was the director, or you could say like he was chancellor of Princeton Institute. And he was a physicist as well. And just to give you an idea what kind of professor he was, we call him as father of atom bomb. He was the one who was project director of the Manhattan Project. Back to it, now both Professor Freeman Dyson and Professor Robert Oppenheimer were on top of their, level of intelligence and knowledge. Both of them looked at this thesis and they were surprised. They said, how could a young person, only age of 21, could solve a problem in 5 months where we have spent most of our working lives and we couldn't solve it? That shows God-given intelligence to Professor Abdul Salam Saab. And they immediately said, they decided that we give him a sponsorship and we invite him to come to Princeton. And they sent the sponsorship to Cambridge. Obviously, Professor Salam, or young Salam, I should say, he was only 21, as I said, was very, very happy. And one of the reasons his professor, his supervisor, was very happy that his student, although he had made very little contribution, but at least he was a student, has done such a wonderful thing that the best scientists in the world are inviting him to come over and do the research. And one of the reasons Professor Abdul Salam, or young Abdul Salam, was very happy, that he wanted to meet Professor Albert Einstein. As I said, Albert Einstein is probably the biggest scientist, at least in my opinion, of 20th century. And most scientists will agree with me. And he was alive, but he was very old, maybe around 75 plus. He was very weak and frail person. So young Abdul Salam Sahab, as we have this courtesy in typical Asian culture, he used to stand outside his house, which was very close to the Princeton University. And when Einstein comes out of house, he used to escort him and help him to go to his office, make sure he's settled. And naturally, Einstein was very impressed with the good character of Abdul Salam Sahib. One day when he was standing outside, Einstein stopped and he said, "Young man, what are you researching?" And Salam Sahib said, which I've just mentioned before. And Einstein said, "Do you have any interest in researching on the topic of unifying gravity with electromagnetic force?" Now, I have mentioned gravity and I have mentioned electromagnetic force. So in Einstein's mind was that these two forces are one. But he spent, as far as I know, many, many years to prove that he couldn't. So he said, "Do you have any interest in that?" Now, obviously, Salam Sahib took his advice, but he kept quiet. I have watched one program where unfortunately, a person have said that Salam Sahib answered, "No, I have no interest in it." Salam Sahib never said that. This is very unfair to make this comment to Salam Sahib. As I said, even if I was at Salam Sahib's position, we call him Father of Science, I would have a lot of respect. I would have dared to utter these kind of words. But there are jealous people in some part of the world. So important thing is that have sown a seed that's my opinion, in Salam Sahib's mind that one day I will do research on it. And that's the research he did. And I will explain that in next program or so. And what he did in simple words is he unified along with two other scientists the weak force and electromagnetic force. Now, some people think, and I have read it somewhere as well, that Salam Sahib have solved the problem which Einstein couldn't solve. Now, that is not strictly true. The gravity is still not come into it, and I will make a program later about the unification of these forces and why it is so important. But that problem is still outstanding, and it needs another genius to do this. And I'm sure that genius will be born sometime. Because Einstein made a forecast or a prediction that when we are able to understand all these four forces, we will be able to understand how the universe was created. And he spent 1 year in America, so it was more or less 2 years have passed. And he went to his professor, Kemmer. He said, "Look, my thesis is ready. Am I able to get a PhD degree?" Now, in those days, and probably even now, I don't know exactly, but in those days, certainly the rule was, unless you have researched for 3 years, you are not awarded PhD degree, because even though problem may be tiny, but you have to spend lots and lots of time to research and come with a solution. So Professor Kemmer talked to his head of department and to principal of the college, and he said, "Salam have done it. What do we expect him to do? So he should be granted a PhD degree." And then, interesting thing, rules were changed. And especially the rules were changed to saying, okay, we can give you PhD degree in 2 years. So again, Dr. Abdul Salam, because now he has become a doctor, PhD degree. So he was now a doctor. So he got that and got his PhD. Now, as normally happen, he went to see his Professor Nicholas Kemmer. He said, "I'm going back to Pakistan now, and could you kindly give me a letter of recommendation?" Most graduate and postgraduate students understand what I mean. We always try to get a letter of recommendation from professors so they can say how good the student is. I got one. And Professor Kemmer smiled. He said, what you have done is on your own. My contribution is very little. I'll tell you one thing. I will give you a letter, but you give me another letter. And give me this letter that I have worked under you as a student and you were my supervisor. Now, what I want to say is that Professor Kemmer realized that Dr. Abdul Salam is not an ordinary scientist. One day he will shine like a star and he will reach to the heights. And the biggest height in science is to win a Nobel Prize. So I can say as a student and as a lecturer myself, this is probably the best praise, which you can get from student to a professor and professor to a student. His thesis was the best in that year, and he was awarded Smith Prize, which is like much, much bigger than getting a gold medal in the university. So now I'm using the phrase Professor Abdul Salam Saab because he went back to Pakistan. He was offered the job of professor at mathematics department in Government College, Lahore, which now is converted into university. And he studied there for 4 years. So it was great, to work in the college where you have studied. I mean, I want to share my personal experience. I studied at Talimul Islam College, Rabwa, from FSc to MSc. And before even my result was announced, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis appointed me on the recommendation of Professor Nasir Khan Sahab, who was head of department, that I should be appointed as a lecturer. So I started my lectureship a good few months before my result was out. And he was also, Professor Salam was also given the head of departmentship, honorary head of department of Punjab University, because there was hardly any person of his caliber in Pakistan. Now his principal was not a scientist. He had a degree in MA, very able person, I must say, in his own field. So like all principals do, he offered him 3 options. He said, would you like to be in your spare time hostel warden? Or you want to be Bursar? And the Bursar are people who look after the accounts of the institute. Or do you want to be a football coach? I would have thought Professor Salam Saab, being a mathematician, should have chosen the position of Bursar. At least there was some mathematics involved. But he decided he wanted to become a coach of the football team. Now, I have done a lot of research about the life of Professor Abdul Salam, and I want to share with you that I have written 60 articles which have been published in a magazine called Al-Minar. They are in Urdu, so if you read them, you will realize what a great, great person he was as a student, as a scientist, and as a person who wanted the technology in Pakistan to reach to its peaks. Anyway, he became a football coach, although I must say I researched and I said, was he good for football player? No, he wasn't. He played football like you and I have played when we were kids. But here is a very rare picture. This is the principal. This is Professor Abdul Salam Saab and his football team around him. But Professor Abdul Salam's field was physics, and the most advanced branch of the physics. And in Pakistan, there was no research facility. There was no libraries. He said he researched that is there any magazine which publishes the latest, and he could find only one magazine, and that was many, many years old. So that was the situation in Pakistan. And no wonder his principal could not understand what Professor Abdul Salam have achieved in London, in Cambridge, and what he has achieved in Princeton University. That was probably beyond his capability. But I just as I mentioned this thing, when Professor Abdul Salam Saab won the Nobel Prize, he went to see his principal, who was very, very old at that time. And obviously the principal was very happy. But he said, thank me for this. I have thrown you out of this country so that you go to Cambridge. Had you stayed in government college, you would have never won the Nobel, which is probably true. Because as a scientist, I know you need a scientific community among you so you could share that. So that was just as a comment. Now, it so happened that Professor Nicholas Kemmer was got a very senior position in another university. So he said to his authorities, his principal or head of department, he said, I recommend one person. His name is Professor Abdus Salam. Offer him a job so that he take my position and teach and research here in Cambridge. And he was so keen, he was so fond of, I could say, of Professor Abdus Salam because of his ability. He wrote to the government of Pakistan, government of Punjab, because Professor Salam was working for government of Punjab in Government College Lahore. And it's a long letter, and it's worth reading a letter, and I have mentioned in my the articles which I published. And he literally begged them, encouraged them, forced them, whatever words you want to choose, to release Professor Abdus Salam to come to Cambridge. Now, naturally, Professor Abdus Salam had a great love for his country. His family was there, his parents were there, for which he had a great love. His wife and daughter was there, and his other brothers and rest of the family was there. Most important, he wanted to stay in Pakistan. But having said that, in his one interview, he said, I had two choices. Either I stay in Pakistan and forget physics, or I go to Cambridge and excel in physics. So, with a lot of advice and prayers, he decided to come to Cambridge in 1954. And now he was amongst the best scientists in the world, if I can use that phrase. So he published paper upon paper upon paper in the international magazines. And he was appointed as the scientific secretary in 1955 to the peace conference which was held about atomic energy. And he realized that what atomic energy can do. Of course, atom bomb has horrific consequences. It could kill millions of people, but it is a very powerful thing for the benefit of mankind as well. And Professor Abdus Salam became one of the eminent leading scientists in the world. Now, we all know he won the Nobel Prize. But I want to tell you this thing, which many of you probably don't know, that he missed the Nobel Prize just by a whisker. He should have got the Nobel Prize. And I will tell you this story, why he missed the Nobel Prize in 1957. Had he got the Nobel Prize, he would have been perhaps the youngest scientist in physics who would have won the Nobel Prize. So please do watch my next program, and I will of my presentation, and I will tell you in detail what happened and why he missed that Nobel Prize. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Jazakallah khair. God bless you. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.